My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. Last Friday night, the man I promised to spend my life with threw my only suitcase into the freezing rain and told me to crawl back to the slums. He froze our joint accounts and laughed while his wealthy family watched from the warmth of our foyer. I did not shed a single tear. I just tucked a wet $100 bill into his custom-tailored suit pocket and walked away into the storm. What he did not know was that my suitcase held the exact evidence needed to send him and his arrogant family to federal prison for a very long time. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic people who severely underestimated your worth. The rain was coming down in sheets that Friday evening, hitting the marble steps of our $2 million Atlanta estate with a deafening roar. I stood on the porch, shivering in my trench coat, watching the heavy mahogany front door swing open. My husband Marcus stood framed by the warm golden light of the foyer. At 35, he was the picture of Black elite perfection. A chief financial officer, a proud third-generation Morehouse man, and someone who never let anyone forget his pedigree. But in that moment, his handsome face was twisted into an ugly sneer of pure contempt. He stepped forward and violently hurled my black leather suitcase past me. It tumbled down the wet stairs and landed with a heavy thud in a muddy puddle on the driveway. I flinched, but kept my posture perfectly straight. Behind Marcus, my mother-in-law Beatrice stepped into view. At 62, she looked immaculate, as always wearing her signature pearls and a silk wrap dress even late at night. She stood next to her son, crossing her arms over her chest and offering me a chilling, satisfied smile. She had been waiting for this exact moment since the day Marcus introduced me to her. To Beatrice, I was never good enough for her precious son or their exclusive Jack and Jill country club circles. I was just a girl who grew up in a working-class neighborhood who had to rely on academic scholarships instead of family trust funds. This was not the first time she had tried to put me in my place. I vividly remembered our rehearsal dinner 3 years ago. Beatrice had stood up to give a toast, completely omitting my name from her speech, and then loudly suggested in front of 50 guests that I should take etiquette classes so I would not embarrass Marcus at corporate events. I swallowed the humiliation back then, believing my love for Marcus was worth the disrespect. I was so incredibly wrong. I have already frozen all the joint accounts, Maya Marcus announced, his voice carrying over the sound of the pouring rain. Your credit cards have been canceled, and the joint savings have been transferred to a private holding. The locks on this house will be changed by morning, and the security gate will no longer recognize your passcode. You are officially locked out of my life and my empire. I stared at him, letting the cold rain soak through my hair and run down my face. You are throwing me out into a storm with absolutely nothing, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. You came into this marriage with nothing, he shot back, laughing cruelly. It is only fitting you leave the exact same way. Maybe you can go back to that run-down neighborhood you came from and beg your old friends for a couch to sleep on. You never belonged in this house anyway. You never understood what it takes to build a legacy. You just wanted to ride my coattails and enjoy the luxury of my hard work. Before I could respond, another figure stepped out from the warmth of the living room, joining Marcus and Beatrice in the foyer. It was Bryce, my 33-year-old brother-in-law. Bryce was white, born into old money, and married to Marcus's sister, Nia. He ran a financial technology startup that Marcus constantly pumped money into. Bryce always carried himself with that specific brand of unearned confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege and absolutely no real consequences. He leaned against the doorframe, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, looking at me like I was something he had scraped off the bottom of his designer shoes. "Come on, Maya," Bryce sneered, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You cannot honestly be surprised by this outcome. You have been holding Marcus back for years with your small-minded thinking. While he and I are out here disrupting the market and building a massive financial empire, you are perfectly content working some useless government desk job pushing papers around. You do not understand high-level corporate finance. You do not understand capital risk. You are just dead weight and a liability to our brand." I looked at Bryce, then back at Marcus, who was nodding vigorously in agreement with his brother-in-law. They truly believed their own delusions. They believed their expensive suits, luxury cars, and exclusive networking dinners made them untouchable. Bryce had always treated me like an uneducated secretary. Whenever I tried to ask about their sudden influx of overseas accounts during family dinners, he would pat my hand and tell me not to worry my pretty little head about adult math. They thought my quiet, steady career was a joke, a pitiful little job that contributed nothing to their grand vision of generational wealth. They assumed I spent my days filing mundane reports and waiting for the clock to strike 5. They had absolutely no idea what I really did behind closed doors. Bryce reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He casually tossed it out into the rain. It fluttered down and landed right next to my soaked shoes. "Buy yourself a hot meal on your way back to the slums." Bryce laughed, shaking his head. "Consider it a charitable donation from our enterprise. Try not to spend it all in one place." Beatrice let out a delicate, highly practiced chuckle. Her eyes gleamed with triumphant malice as she looked down at me from the top of the stairs. "Just go, Maya," she said, her tone dripping with fake pity. "You have embarrassed yourself enough for one night. Go back to where you belong and let the men handle the real business. This family has a reputation to uphold, and we can no longer afford to have you dragging down our name." I looked down at the $100 bill soaking up muddy rainwater on the concrete. Any other woman might have broken down sobbing right there. Any other woman might have fallen to her knees, begged for forgiveness, or screamed insults into the storm to defend her dignity. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of weakness. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over me, completely numbing the physical chill of the freezing rain. I slowly bent down and picked up the wet bill. I shook off the dirt, smoothed it out between my fingers, and walked right back up the marble steps toward the door. Marcus instinctively took a half step back as I approached, but I did not stop until I was inches from his face. I reached out and deliberately tucked that wet, dirty $100 bill straight into the breast pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket. He looked down at it in disgust, then back up at me with sheer confusion. "Keep it, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper that cut right through the noise of the rain. "You are going to need it to buy ramen in prison." I did not wait to see the reaction on Beatrice or Bryce's faces. I turned my back on the three of them, walked down the steps, and grabbed my heavy suitcase by the handle. Behind me, Marcus erupted into booming theatrical laughter. He genuinely thought I was having a mental breakdown. He thought I was just a bitter, discarded wife, making empty, dramatic threats because my feelings were hurt and my pride was shattered. His mocking laughter followed me all the way down the long, winding driveway, blending with the thunder overhead. But I was the one smiling as I walked into the dark. Marcus thought he had stripped me of everything. He thought he had kicked me out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a ruined reputation. He had no idea that my heavy leather suitcase did not contain a single piece of clothing or personal item. It contained 3 military-grade encrypted hard drives. And on those drives was every single piece of evidence proving that his brilliant financial empire was nothing more than a massive illegal money laundering syndicate. Over the next 7 days, I did not exist in the physical world. I became a ghost. But my husband was putting on the performance of a lifetime for the entire city of Atlanta. By Saturday morning, my phone was flooded with notifications. Marcus had wasted no time. He was posting videos from the VIP section of a high-end club in Midtown, popping bottles of imported champagne. Sitting right beside him on the white leather sofa was Vanessa. She was 25, a junior marketing assistant at his firm who had been desperately trying to climb the social ladder. In the video, Marcus had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, looking directly into the camera with a smug grin. The caption read, "Finally dropped the dead weight. Upgrade season." He made sure to tag my public profile so every mutual acquaintance could see it. He wanted me to feel utterly replaceable. He wanted to break my spirit in front of our entire network. But the public humiliation did not stop with Marcus. His mother Beatrice immediately mobilized her network. She sent a mass text message to the executive board of her country club chapter. A loyal friend of mine forwarded me the screenshots. Beatrice claimed that I had suffered a mental breakdown, embezzled thousands of dollars from Marcus's private accounts, and fled into the night out of shame. She told the prominent women of Atlanta that I was a scam artist who had finally been exposed. She spun a tragic tale of how her successful, generous son was currently dealing with the heartbreak of a thieving wife. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. They were trying to control the narrative, quickly sealing all the exits so that when I finally showed my face, I would be completely discredited. By Wednesday, the rest of the family joined the attack. I received a scathing voicemail from Nia. She sounded incredibly bored and arrogant, exactly like her husband Bryce. She demanded that I return the money Beatrice claimed I stole and ordered me to sign uncontested divorce papers the moment Marcus's lawyers sent them. She threatened to use Bryce's family connections to drag my name through the mud and ensure I never found a job in the city again. She reminded me that I was a nobody who had temporarily infiltrated their elite circle, and now the ride was over. I did not block them. I did not delete my social media apps. I sat in the quiet luxury of a temporary high-rise apartment I had rented under a corporate alias, and I watched everything. Every post was a timestamp. Every geotagged location at a luxury boutique with Vanessa was a digital footprint. Every boastful claim Marcus made online about his unstoppable wealth was another nail being hammered directly into his own coffin. They thought my silence was the silence of a defeated woman crying under her covers. They did not know it was the silence of a predator, watching its prey walk blindly into a trap. When Monday morning arrived, I did not look like a woman who had just been thrown out of her home. I wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back perfectly slick and professional. I carried a briefcase containing the encrypted hard drives and walked through the heavy glass doors of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. Security did not ask me for identification or tell me to wait in the visitor line. The armed guards nodded respectfully as I bypassed the metal detectors using my top-tier federal clearance badge. Marcus and his arrogant brother-in-law Bryce had spent years mocking my government desk job. They thought I was a low-level paper pusher, a glorified secretary who managed basic compliance forms for a modest salary. They never bothered to learn my actual title. I was a senior risk audit specialist for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. My job was not to file papers. My job was to dismantle financial terrorists. I walked into a secure conference room on the top floor where Special Agent Miller was already waiting. He was a veteran investigator who had been trying to build a case against Bryce's financial technology startup for over a year. The Bureau kept hitting dead ends due to Bryce's generational wealth and his army of sophisticated corporate lawyers. I placed the 3 hard drives on the metal table and slid them across to Miller. I unlocked the drives using a decryption key and projected the master ledgers onto the large screen on the wall. For the next 5 hours, I walked the federal agents through the exact architecture of Marcus and Bryce's empire. It was a masterpiece of pure arrogance. Marcus had been siphoning millions of dollars from his corporate clients using dummy vendor accounts. But he needed a way to clean the cash without triggering federal banking alerts. That was where Bryce came in. Bryce used his shiny new Silicon Valley-style startup as a digital washing machine. Marcus would funnel the dirty money into Bryce's platform, disguising it as anonymous venture capital investments and user deposits. Bryce would then route the money through a maze of international servers before depositing it right back into Marcus's private offshore trusts, completely clean and untaxed. Bryce provided the pristine white privilege cover of a brilliant tech innovator while Marcus manipulated the corporate books. They thought they were the smartest men in the room. They thought they had outsmarted the federal government. But Marcus made one fatal arrogant mistake. He brought his work laptop home and left it unlocked on his mahogany desk, night after night, because he genuinely believed his wife was too uneducated to understand complex capital risk algorithms. He thought I was just looking at his screensaver. He never realized I was memorizing his routing numbers, mapping his network, and backing up his shadow ledgers while he slept. As the agents cross-referenced the accounts, another pathetic layer of the truth emerged. I pointed to a specific series of wire transfers that made Agent Miller raise his eyebrows. The money laundering did not just fund Marcus and Bryce. The entire family was bleeding the system dry. Marcus's sister Nia, who loved to flaunt her designer bags and month-long European vacations, was living entirely off a fraudulent consulting salary paid out by the startup. She had never worked a day in her life, but she was receiving $50,000 a month in clean cash. Even more disgusting was Beatrice. The grand matriarch who looked down her nose at my working-class background had her prestigious charity gala, funded entirely by Marcus's dirty money. Her entire social standing among the Atlanta elite was built on stolen funds. They were all leeches feeding off a rotting carcass and looking down on the very person who had the power to incinerate their world. By Thursday afternoon, my audit report was finalized, signed, and sealed. The federal magistrate took one look at the mountain of irrefutable evidence I provided and immediately signed the warrants. The raid was greenlit. Asset freezing protocols were initiated across 20 different banking institutions. The dominoes were set up perfectly. All I had to do was wait for them to fall. Friday morning arrived exactly 7 days after Marcus threw my suitcase into the freezing rain. The weather today was a stark contrast. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the Atlanta skyline. I was sitting on the private balcony of my apartment, wearing a silk robe holding a ceramic mug of hot black coffee. The city looked incredibly peaceful from 20 stories up. On the glass table next to me, my phone screen suddenly lit up. The caller ID flashed Marcus's name. I did not move. I just watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Then a barrage of text messages began flooding my screen in rapid succession. Maya, answer the phone right now. Where are you? What did you do to the accounts? Answer me, Maya. I calmly took a sip of my coffee, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. I checked my notification center. In the span of 30 minutes, there were exactly 72 missed calls from my husband. The panic radiating through the screen was palpable. He was no longer the arrogant king of his castle. He was a cornered rat who had just realized the trap had snapped shut. The screen flashed again. Call number 73. I set my coffee mug down on the table. I picked up the phone, swiped the green accept button, and slowly brought the device to my ear. I did not say a word. I just waited, listening to the sound of his world burning to the ground. For a long moment, there was only the sound of heavy, frantic breathing on the other end of the line. Then a loud crash echoed through the speaker, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden door being splintered open. I could hear men shouting commands in the background, demanding that everyone step away from their computers and keep their hands visible. I heard the sharp sound of glass shattering and the panicked screams of the reception staff. Maya, what did you do? Marcus screamed into the phone. His voice was completely stripped of that smooth, arrogant polish he usually carried. He sounded like a terrified animal. What did you tell them, Maya? There are federal agents tearing my office apart. They are ripping servers out of the walls. They just threw Bryce against the glass boardroom window and put him in handcuffs. Call them off. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you are just an angry ex-wife trying to cause trouble. You have to fix this right now. I took another slow sip of my coffee, watching a flock of birds fly past my balcony. I let him ramble for a few more seconds, soaking in the sheer desperation of his demands. It was fascinating how quickly his superiority complex vanished the moment real consequences broke through his front door. I did not do anything. Marcus? I replied, my voice completely steady and devoid of any emotion. I simply did my job. I submitted a highly detailed audit report to the proper authorities. You are the one who spent the last 4 years building a criminal enterprise. You are the one who laundered millions of dollars for offshore syndicates. I just provided the receipts. You set me up! He roared, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing as he apparently paced around whatever small corner of his office the agents had confined him to. You planted those files. You hacked my system to make it look like I was stealing. I am a respected financial officer. No one is going to believe a low-level government clerk over me. I will hire the best defense team in the country, and we will destroy you in court. We will prove you fabricated all of this because you were jealous of my success. I could not help but smile at his blind arrogance. Even while his empire was literally being dismantled around him, he still believed he could buy his way out of reality. You cannot buy your way out of your own digital fingerprints, Marcus, I said, speaking slowly so every word would sink into his panicked brain. You initiated wire transfers from the Cayman Island accounts directly into Bryce's holding firm, using your own biometric authentication. You authorized $50,000 monthly consulting payments to your sister Nia for a company she has never set foot in. You funneled human trafficking money into your mother's prestigious charity foundation to buy her a seat on the country club board. You left a trail of financial devastation so wide and so obvious that my department did not even need to dig deep to find it. Your arrogance made you incredibly careless. There was a sudden scuffle on his end of the line. I heard an agent ordering Marcus to put the phone down, but he ignored them, shouting over the noise. "You are my wife," he pleaded, his tone abruptly, shifting from aggressive threats to desperate manipulation. A wife does not do this to her husband. A wife stands by her family. We can work this out, Maya. Whatever you want, I will give it to you. You want the house. It is yours. You want half the legitimate accounts. I will transfer them today. Just call the lead agent and tell them the evidence is compromised. Tell them you forged the data. Please, Maya. They are putting my hands behind my back. I set my coffee mug down and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. A husband does not throw his wife into the freezing rain with a single suitcase, Marcus, I reminded him. A husband does not cancel her credit cards and mock her background while his family watches like it is a spectator sport. You told me to crawl back to the slums. You told me I was dead weight. You thought I was a liability to your grand brand. Well, your brand is currently trending on the federal indictment list. I hope your mother wore her best pearls for her mugshot, because the agents are executing a warrant at her estate right now. The silence that followed was profound. The chaotic background noise of the raid seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. I could perfectly picture the realization washing over his face. He had lost. He had underestimated the quiet woman he married, and it had cost him his entire universe. But then the ragged breathing stopped. The panic that had been suffocating his voice vanished. A low, dark laugh began to rumble through the speaker. It was not a laugh of defeat. It was a vicious, calculated sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You really think you are the smartest person in the room? Do not you, Maya? He sneered, his voice dropping into a malicious whisper. You think you played the perfect long game. You think you are going to sit on your little balcony and watch me take the fall while you play the innocent whistleblower. You really are just a naive working-class girl who does not understand how the real world operates. I gripped the phone tighter, my senses instantly going on high alert. What are you talking about, Marcus? Did you really think I would run a massive international money laundering operation without a fail-safe plan? He laughed, the sound dripping with pure malice. Did you honestly believe I would risk my own neck without having a designated scapegoat ready to take the bullet? You are so busy analyzing spreadsheets that you forgot to look at the paperwork right in front of you. I stood up from my chair, my heart rate accelerating. What paperwork? Think back to last April, Maya, he taunted. Think back to all those late nights in my home office. Remember those massive stacks of routine household tax documents I asked you to sign? Remember the refinancing papers for the estate, the insurance policies, the mutual fund disclosures? You trusted me completely back then. You just smiled and signed wherever I put a yellow sticky note. You never read the fine print because you thought your brilliant husband was just handling the boring adult math. A cold sense of dread began to pool in my stomach. The memories flashed through my mind. Stacks of dense legal jargon. Marcus standing over my shoulder, kissing my cheek, pointing to the dotted lines. I had signed dozens of documents without a second thought because he was my husband, and I trusted him with our financial security. Hidden inside those stacks of routine paperwork were the ownership charters for the Delaware shell corporations. Marcus continued, his voice thick with triumph. The exact same shell corporations that hold every single dollar of that dirty offshore money. You are the registered majority shareholder, Maya. You are the sole managing director on paper. For the last 2 years, I have systematically transferred the legal ownership of the entire illegal syndicate into your name. I am just a salaried employee of those holding companies. You are the mastermind. I stared out at the city skyline, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. You forged my signature, I stated, but even to my own ears, my voice lacked its previous certainty. I did not have to forge anything, he replied smugly. You signed them with your own hand. The ink is yours. The dates match. The federal agents might be tearing my office apart today, but the moment they analyze those master ownership ledgers, they are going to see your name at the very top of the criminal hierarchy. You thought you were sending me to prison, but you just handed them the exact evidence they need to lock you away for the rest of your life. He was speaking to an agent now, his voice muffled as he pulled the phone slightly away from his mouth. Yes, officer, I am cooperating. My wife is on the phone. She is the managing director of the holding company. I am just following her financial directives. He brought the phone back to his mouth one last time. Enjoy your coffee, Maya. I will see you in federal court. And when I do, I am going to watch the judge sentence you to 20 years while I walk out a free man. I watched the live news broadcast on my tablet with the volume turned down low. The footage from downtown Atlanta was playing on a continuous loop. Federal agents in tactical gear were carrying dozens of cardboard boxes and confiscated computer servers out of the glass front doors of Bryce's tech headquarters. But the real spectacle was not the raid itself. It was the press conference happening on the courthouse steps just 2 hours later. Bryce was standing behind a podium flanked by 3 of the most expensive defense attorneys on the East Coast. He had been granted bail within 30 minutes of his arrest. He was wearing a navy blue suit, looking perfectly groomed and adopting the expression of a deeply wounded visionary. His lead attorney, a man whose family name was carved into half the buildings in the city, read a prepared statement. The narrative was crafted with absolute flawless precision. Bryce was being painted as the brilliant but naive tech founder who trusted the wrong person. The attorney explicitly stated that the company's chief financial officer, Marcus, had abused his position, manipulated the software algorithms, and orchestrated a massive unilateral fraud scheme entirely behind Bryce's back. They were serving Marcus up on a silver platter. The systemic privilege was functioning exactly as it was designed to. Marcus had spent his entire adult life desperately trying to assimilate into Bryce's world of old generational wealth. He bought the right cars, joined the right country clubs, and looked down on working-class people like me to prove he belonged in their elite circle. But the moment the federal government kicked down the door, Marcus was instantly reminded of his actual place in their hierarchy. He was not their equal. He was the fall guy. Bryce got a tailored suit and a podium. Marcus got a perp walk in handcuffs and a denied bail hearing because the prosecution argued he was a flight risk. My phone vibrated on the glass table, interrupting the broadcast. The caller ID flashed the name Nia. I took a slow breath and answered the call. I did not even have the chance to say hello before her voice exploded through the speaker. "You vindictive, jealous trash!" Nia screamed, her voice shrill and trembling with absolute rage. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You could not handle the fact that my brother was upgrading his life, so you decided to invent some psychotic lie to the feds. You think you are so smart, Maya. You think pushing papers at some sad little government agency makes you powerful." I kept the phone pressed to my ear, remaining perfectly silent. I wanted her to get it all out. I wanted her to exhaust her delusions before I dismantled her reality. "You ruined my husband's reputation," Nia continued, her tone shifting from screaming to a furious, breathless panic. "Bryce is a good man. He comes from a respectable family. His grandfather was a federal judge, Maya. Do you honestly believe his family is going to let some bitter, discarded ex-wife destroy their legacy? Bryce's father is already pulling in the best legal team in the country. They are going to crush you. They are going to sue you for defamation, perjury, and corporate sabotage. You are going to spend the rest of your pathetic life paying off our legal fees." Nia was hyperventilating now, grasping at the shield of her husband's whiteness and wealth, as if it could somehow protect her from federal indictments. She had never worked a legitimate job in her life. For the past 4 years, she had funded her lavish lifestyle, her European shopping sprees, and her designer wardrobe completely through a fake consulting salary paid out by Bryce's startup. She thought her marriage to old money made her untouchable. She truly believed I was the villain who had ruined her perfect fairy tale. "Are you finished, Naya?" I asked, my voice entirely flat and devoid of any emotion. "I am just getting started," she snarled. "You are going to prison, Maya. Bryce's lawyers are drafting the paperwork right now. They are going to prove that you fabricated the audit because you were jealous of Vanessa. You could not stand that Marcus found a younger, prettier woman who actually fits into our social circle. You are just a pathetic, broke girl from the slums who got lucky for a few years, and now you are throwing a tantrum because you got sent back to where you belong." I walked over to my kitchen counter and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating my face in the dim apartment. "You should really stop talking and turn on the local news, Naya," I said, clicking open my encrypted mail server. "Your respectable husband with the federal judge grandfather just threw your brother directly under the bus. Bryce's legal team just released a public statement naming Marcus as the sole mastermind of the entire money laundering operation. They are handing all of Marcus's private communications over to the prosecutor to secure immunity for Bryce. Your perfect husband is letting your brother take a 20-year prison sentence so he can walk away completely clean." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds before Naya found her voice again. "You are lying," she whispered, though the absolute certainty had vanished from her tone. "Bryce would never do that. Bryce and Marcus are partners. They are brothers. You are just trying to turn us against each other." "I am not trying to do anything except give you a reality check," I replied, the clicking of my keyboard sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "But since you are so confident in your husband's loyalty and character, I think you should check your email. I just sent you a highly secure PDF document. You might want to sit down before you open it." "What is it?" Nia demanded, her voice shaking slightly. "More of your fabricated government spreadsheets. I am not opening anything from you. It is a direct extraction from the offshore holding accounts your husband manages," I explained, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I did not just audit Marcus's ledgers, Nia. I audited the entire syndicate. That includes the private trust fund your father left you, the one you transferred into Bryce's management company, because you trusted your husband to double your investments. Open the file, Nia. Look at page 4. I heard the muffled sound of a laptop opening on her end, followed by the rapid clicking of a trackpad. I waited, listening to her ragged breathing as the document loaded on her screen. "Look at line item 22, I instructed, my voice cold and clinical. "Do you see the routing number originating from your personal family trust? Now trace that column to the right. Look at the destination account. It is a limited liability company registered in Delaware." "What is this?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could hear the confusion and rising panic in her tone. "Why is my trust fund transferring $80,000 a month to this company? What is this LLC? "Scroll to page 7, I commanded. "Look at the corporate charter for that specific LLC. Look at the listed beneficiary." There was an agonizing silence on the phone. I knew exactly what she was looking at. I had stared at that same document for an hour when I first uncovered it, feeling a mixture of absolute disgust and profound pity. "No," Nia gasped, a sudden wet choke escaping her throat. "No, that is impossible. This is a mistake." "It is not a mistake," I said calmly. "Your husband has been systematically draining your personal family trust fund for the past 14 months. He did not invest your money, Nia. He embezzled it. And he used your money to secure a luxury penthouse lease and an unlimited platinum credit card for the registered beneficiary. Read the name on the lease, Nia. Read it out loud." I heard a sound that was half sob and half scream. The name printed on the luxury penthouse lease, the name of the woman living entirely off Nia's stolen inheritance, was Vanessa. "That is right," I said, letting the crushing reality of the situation settle over her. "Your perfect husband, who comes from such a respectable family, stole your money to act as a sugar daddy for your brother's mistress." Bryce has been funding Vanessa's entire lifestyle using your inheritance. While Marcus was busy parading Vanessa around town to humiliate me, Bryce was quietly using your bank accounts to pay for her designer bags, her sports cars, and her rent. Nia was hyperventilating now, letting out guttural broken sobs that echoed through the phone speaker. The illusion of her elite privileged life was shattering into a million pieces. The men she had defended, the men she believed made her superior to me, had completely humiliated and ruined her. Her brother had brought a gold digger into their circle, and her husband had stolen her life savings to fund the affair. "You called me a liability, Nia," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. "You said I was holding this family back. But the truth is, I was the only person in your circle with any actual integrity. Your brother and your husband are not brilliant businessmen. They are common thieves. And they did not just steal from the federal government. They stole from you. Enjoy dealing with Bryce's respectable family lawyers, Nia. Because when the IRS seizes whatever is left of your assets tomorrow morning, you will not even have enough money left to hire a public defender." I did not wait for her to respond. I pressed the red button on my screen, ending the call and tossing the phone onto the kitchen counter. I walked over to the balcony glass doors and looked out at the city lights. The storm from Friday night had completely passed, leaving the streets clean and washed. My phone began to vibrate again, continuously buzzing against the hard surface of the counter. It was probably Nia calling back begging for help, or Marcus calling from the Federal Holding Center, realizing his entire life was over. I did not look back. I simply walked out onto the balcony, breathing in the fresh, cool air. The cleanup was finally done. I had barely finished my coffee on the balcony when my secure work phone chimed with a summons from Agent Miller. There were final compliance documents requiring my physical signature to authorize the secondary wave of asset seizures. I changed into a sharp navy suit, pinned my federal badge to my lapel, and drove to the regional field office. The morning air was sharp and unforgiving, but I felt entirely invincible. The digital traps I had set were executing flawlessly, and the financial empire Marcus and his family had built on the backs of others was disintegrating in real time. I parked my modest sedan in the secure underground garage of the federal building. The concrete cavern was quiet, echoing only with the sound of my heels as I walked toward the private elevators. "Maya, wait." The voice echoed sharply off the concrete walls. I stopped and turned slowly. Stepping out from the shadows of a massive support pillar was Beatrice. She looked absolutely nothing like the immaculate, untouchable matriarch who had stood on her marble porch a week ago and laughed while her son threw my luggage into the freezing rain. The visual transformation was staggering. Her signature silk wrap dress was severely wrinkled. Her posture, once rigid with aristocratic pride, was now slumped and defensive. The heavy pearl necklace she wore looked like a chain dragging down her neck, and her meticulously applied makeup could not hide the deep, dark circles of absolute panic framing her eyes. She had clearly been waiting in the cold, damp garage for hours, having somehow tracked my vehicle. I did not reach for my pepper spray or call for the armed guards stationed just beyond the elevator banks. I simply stood there, folding my arms across my chest and watching her approach. She stopped a few feet away, clutching a leather handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. "Marcus is in a federal holding cell," Beatrice said, her voice trembling as she attempted to maintain her usual tone of smooth authority. "They denied his bail, Maya. My son is sitting in a cage like a common criminal. They treated him like an animal. They marched him out of his office in handcuffs while his employees watched." "He is a common criminal, Beatrice," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. "He just wore a more expensive suit while he robbed people. You should be grateful they allowed him to walk out on his own 2 feet instead of dragging him out." Beatrice flinched, but she quickly composed herself, stepping closer with a look of desperate, intense earnestness. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but thought better of it when she saw the icy warning in my eyes. She dropped the hostility and pivoted to a completely different tactic. She was going to try and manipulate my sense of loyalty. "We need to talk about duty, Maya," she began, her tone shifting into a low, urgent whisper. We need to talk about what it means to be a Black woman in this country and the sacrifices we have to make to protect our legacy. You know how hard it is for our men to succeed. You know the systemic barriers they face every single day. Marcus broke through all of that. He represents the pinnacle of Black excellence. He is a Morehouse man, a corporate leader, a symbol of what we can achieve when we elevate ourselves. I stared at her, feeling a profound wave of disgust wash over me. You are not seriously trying to use race to justify a federal money laundering syndicate, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. I am talking about the black tax, Maya, she insisted, her eyes wide and pleading. I am talking about the heavy burden those of us who make it to the top have to carry. We have to protect our kings. We have to protect the wealth and the status that elevates our entire community. When a Black man of Marcus' stature falls, it sets us all back. The media will use him to tear down everything we have built. But you, Maya, you grew up with nothing. You know how to survive at the bottom. You are used to struggling. I could see exactly where she was going with this twisted monologue. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was breathtaking. Marcus cannot survive in a federal prison. Beatrice continued, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. It will destroy his mind and his spirit. But you are strong. You have always been so resilient. You can handle the fallout. The federal prosecutors just want a conviction. They want a signature on a confession. If you go upstairs right now and tell them you acted alone, tell them you manipulated his accounts without his knowledge, they will give you a plea deal. You are a government employee. They will go easy on you. You might only serve a few years in a minimum security camp. She took another step closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. It is your obligation as his wife to take this hit. You owe him this, Maya. He took you out of the slums and gave you a life of luxury. Now it is your duty to pay that tax. Protect his legacy. Take the blame. I let her finish. I let her lay bare the absolute moral bankruptcy of her entire existence. She genuinely believed that because I came from a working-class background, my life was expendable. She thought my freedom was a fair trade for her son's fraudulent reputation. Legacy. I repeated the word, letting the heavy metallic echo of the parking garage amplify the sheer contempt in my voice. You want me to go to federal prison to protect a legacy built on offshore fraud and exploiting the vulnerable. You do not care about Black excellence, Beatrice. You care about your country club memberships. You care about your luxury galas and your VIP seating at charity events. You use the struggles of our community as a convenient shield to hide the fact that your son is a glorified thief. I took a step toward her, forcing her to back up against the concrete pillar. And do not ever speak to me about loyalty or duty. I continued, my voice sharp as broken glass. Where was your sense of family duty when you stood on that porch and watched your son throw me out into a storm? Where was your maternal warmth when you spread vicious lies to your social circle, claiming I was a scam artist? You thought I was a lower-class liability, dragging down your precious brand. You never respected me. You only see my value now because you need a sacrificial lamb to slaughter. My answer is no. I am not taking the fall for a narcissist, and I am certainly not doing it to save your social calendar. The false warmth instantly vanished from Beatrice's face. The desperate, pleading mother disappeared, replaced entirely by the vicious, elitist bully I had dealt with for the past 4 years. Her eyes narrowed into furious slits, and her upper lip curled into a sneer. You ungrateful, arrogant little nobody, Beatrice hissed, her voice echoing loudly off the concrete. You think you have won because you handed over some flash drives. You think you can destroy my family and walk away untouched. I will spend every single dime of my own money to ruin you. I will hire a legal team so ruthless and so expensive that they will bury you under decades of litigation. My husband left me a massive fortune, Maya. I own a historic estate in Buckhead. I have a multi-million-dollar retirement portfolio. I have more liquid capital than you will ever see in your lifetime. I will liquidate every single asset I own to save my son and ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life paying for what you did. I stood perfectly still, letting her furious threats wash over me. She was so blinded by her own arrogance that she had completely lost touch with reality. I looked at her not with anger, but with profound clinical pity. You really should have checked your own banking apps before you drove all the way down here to threaten a federal agent. Beatrice, what I said? My voice dropping to a calm conversational tone. Beatrice stopped mid-breath, her eyes darted back and forth. What are you talking about? I did not just audit Marcus and Bryce, I explained, tilting my head slightly as I watched the realization begin to dawn on her face. I audited the entire financial ecosystem. I tracked every single dollar that moved through that syndicate over the last 2 years. And in the weeks leading up to the raid, Marcus knew the federal authorities were closing in. He knew the syndicates he was laundering money for were demanding their cash back. He was desperately bleeding liquidity to cover his tracks and hide the massive holes in his ledgers. I took a slow breath, delivering the final crushing blow. He did not just drain my joint accounts, Beatrice. He drained yours. Beatrice let out a sharp, nervous laugh, shaking her head in denial. That is a lie. Marcus does not have access to my private trusts. My husband set those accounts up specifically for me. Marcus is a chief financial officer, I reminded her sharply. And 2 years ago, when you had that minor health scare, you gave him full, durable power of attorney over your entire estate so he could manage your medical billing. You trusted your brilliant son to handle the adult math. The color completely drained from Beatrice's face, leaving her looking gray and hollow. Her hands began to tremble violently, causing her leather handbag to shake against her side. He took out a massive second mortgage on your historic estate in Buckhead. I continued stating the facts with ruthless precision. He completely liquidated your multi-million-dollar retirement portfolio. He forged your digital authorization and funneled every single penny of your generational wealth into a phantom offshore account in the Cayman Islands to try and save himself. And yesterday afternoon, the federal government seized that offshore account entirely. Beatrice staggered backward, her shoulders hitting the concrete pillar with a dull thud. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a strangled, gasping sound came out. Your son did not just burn his own house down, Beatrice, I said, stepping back and turning toward the elevators. He took a match to yours. You do not have a fortune to fight me with. You do not have the capital to hire a legal team. You are completely broke. Your historic mansion belongs to the federal government now. You are officially homeless. Have a wonderful weekend, Beatrice. Try not to spend that $100 bill all in one place. It took exactly 48 hours for Marcus's high-priced legal team to find a sympathetic federal judge. Despite the mountain of irrefutable evidence and the prosecution's fierce argument that he was a severe flight risk, an emergency bail hearing was granted. A massive bond was posted to secure his temporary release. I knew the money did not come from his mother, since Beatrice was currently dealing with the total seizure of her own historic estate and the freezing of her retirement accounts. The bail money likely came from a high-interest shadow loan leveraged against the last remaining clean assets of his rapidly crumbling firm. He walked out of the Federal Holding Center, looking battered, but unfortunately unbroken. He did not return to our marital home. He went straight to the Sovereign Tower, the $3 million downtown penthouse he shared with Vanessa. It was the ultimate symbol of his perceived untouchability. By Sunday morning, he was already back on the offensive. He had invited a local news crew into the opulent lobby of the building, broadcasting his fabricated narrative across every major channel in Atlanta. I sat at my kitchen counter watching the live feed on my laptop. Marcus looked directly into the camera, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and tightly gripping Vanessa's hand. She was playing her part flawlessly, wearing minimal makeup and a modest cashmere sweater, looking exactly like the terrified innocent victim of a cruel vendetta. My ex-wife is an unstable, vindictive woman, Marcus declared to the array of microphones, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She abused her low-level government clearance to manipulate financial records and frame me. She could not handle the fact that our marriage was over and that I had moved on to a healthier relationship. This entire federal investigation is a witch hunt based on fabricated evidence planted by a jealous, bitter woman. She stole my assets, froze my legitimate business accounts, and dragged my pristine reputation through the mud. I am fully cooperating with the authorities, and when the truth comes to light, my legal team will pursue maximum charges against her for defamation, perjury, and fraud. He looked so confident, so incredibly arrogant. He genuinely believed that if he said the lie loudly enough, the world would simply bow to his reality. He thought he could spin a massive federal indictment into a cheap tabloid divorce scandal. He was relying on the age-old privilege of a wealthy man claiming that a woman was simply acting out of hysteria. I closed the laptop. The quiet click of the screen shutting was the only sound in the room. I smoothed the wrinkles from my navy trench coat, picked up my leather briefcase, and walked out the door. It was time to strip away his last remaining sanctuary. I did not drive to the penthouse alone. When dealing with a cornered narcissist, you never walk into their territory without proper backup. I arrived at the Sovereign Tower accompanied by the county sheriff and 2 armed deputies. The sky was overcast, casting a heavy gray light over the city, but my mind was crystal clear. The lobby of the Sovereign Tower was an immaculate display of ridiculous excess. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting warm light over imported Italian marble floors. Cascading water features masked the sound of the busy street outside. It was a fortress deliberately designed to keep the working class out and insulate the elite from the consequences of the real world. As we walked through the revolving glass doors, the concierge behind the brass front desk immediately reached for his phone, his eyes widening in absolute panic at the sight of uniformed officers invading his pristine lobby. The sheriff stepped forward, placing a heavy gloved hand over the receiver and shaking his head silently. The concierge stepped back, raising his hands in immediate surrender. We did not even have to press the elevator call button. The polished steel doors chimed and slid open on the ground floor, revealing Marcus and Vanessa. They were dressed in matching designer leisure wear, carrying expensive leather gym bags, likely heading down to the private wellness center to continue their performance of the unbothered, victimized elite. The moment Marcus stepped out and saw me standing there flanked by law enforcement, his smug, media-ready expression dissolved into pure, venomous rage. The color completely drained from Vanessa's face. She instantly shrank back into the elevator car, clutching her designer bag to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting between the armed deputies and my calm demeanor. Marcus dropped his gym bag. It hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. He stormed forward, his chest puffed out completely, ignoring the presence of the armed officers. His deep-seated superiority complex entirely overrode his basic survival instincts. "What the hell are you doing here?" Marcus roared, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings and causing the few wealthy residents in the lobby to stop and stare in horror. "How did you get past security? This is a private luxury building, Maya. You have absolutely no right to be here." He turned to the sheriff, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "Arrest her. I want her arrested for stalking and harassment right now. She is a deranged, bitter ex-wife who has been following me. I pay $10,000 a month in association fees to keep trash like her out of my building. Remove her from this property immediately." The sheriff did not move. He did not reach for his handcuffs. He simply looked at Marcus with the exhausted patience of a man who dealt with arrogant criminals for a living. He kept his hands resting casually on his utility belt, waiting for my signal. "You are trespassing on my territory," Marcus hissed, stepping closer to me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into backing down. "I just told the entire city exactly who you are. You are a fraud. You are a low-class nobody who tried to steal my life because you could not earn your own. I am untouchable here. You cannot touch me in this building. Get out of my sight before my lawyers bury you so deep you will never see daylight again." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I let him exhaust his breath. I let him scream his empty, pathetic threats into the cavernous lobby until the silence rushed back in to fill the massive space. I looked at the vein pulsing angrily in his neck, the sweat beading on his forehead, and the sheer, absolute desperation hiding just beneath his aggressive bluster. He was clinging to the illusion of his wealth and his real estate because it was the only thing he had left to protect his fragile ego. "I did not come here to argue with you, Marcus," I said. my voice cutting through the quiet lobby with absolute chilling clarity. I unlatched the brass clasps on my briefcase. The sound was sharp and mechanical. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of documents perfectly bound and printed on heavy legal paper. "What is that?" Marcus sneered, attempting to maintain his bravado, though his eyes flicked nervously to the paperwork. "More fabricated spreadsheets. More fake government paperwork to feed to your supervisors. I am not looking at anything you hand me. I am not listening to a single word you say. This is my home, and you are leaving right now." I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that finally made the stark terror register in his eyes. "You really should have watched the news a little closer today, Marcus," I replied, my tone completely conversational. "You were so busy talking to the press and spinning your little fairy tale that you missed the latest asset forfeiture filings. You missed the fundamental details of your own sloppy accounting." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to hold his ground. "This penthouse is not leased under your name," I explained, watching the arrogant posture begin to melt away from his shoulders. "It is leased under the Delaware Shell Corporation you created to hide your stolen assets from the Internal Revenue Service. The exact same Shell Corporation that legally lists me as the sole managing director. You transferred the ownership to me to protect yourself, and now I legally control the lease to this entire property." I held the documents up the bright red seal of the federal magistrate, catching the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. I extended my hand, offering the heavy stack of paper to the sheriff. The sheriff stepped forward and pressed the documents firmly against Marcus's chest, forcing him to take them. "I am not here to argue with you, Marcus," I stated, my voice ringing with undeniable finality. "I am here to serve an eviction notice." Marcus looked down at the heavy stack of documents pressed against his chest by the sheriff. For a split second, genuine confusion washed over his features before his deep-seated arrogance rushed back to fill the void. He snatched the papers from the officer's hand, holding them up like a cheap prop. He threw his head back and let out a loud barking laugh that echoed across the imported Italian marble of the lobby. He actually believed this was a bluff. He thought I was playing a desperate game of semantics. "You are out of your mind, Maya," he said, shaking the documents in the air. "An eviction notice. Are you completely illiterate? You might have tricked the feds into freezing my liquid accounts, but you do not understand real estate law. A shell corporation might hold the secondary lease, but I own the physical deed to this penthouse. I hold the primary mortgage through a private offshore lender. This is my property. You cannot evict a man from a building he owns. You are standing in my territory, and you are making an absolute fool of yourself in front of law enforcement." I did not blink. I just watched him clinging desperately to the illusion of his wealth. "You are right about one thing, Marcus," I replied, my voice echoing with a calm, clinical precision. "You did hold the primary mortgage through a private lender. You leveraged this entire $3 million penthouse to secure a massive shadow loan because you were desperately trying to cover the gaping holes in your offshore accounts. You needed fast cash to pay off the syndicates before the federal audit caught up with you. But you seem to have forgotten the basic mechanics of high-risk lending." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "When the federal agents kicked down the doors of your office yesterday morning and seized your servers, it triggered an automatic default clause in your lending agreement. Your private bank panicked. They realized you were the target of a massive federal RICO investigation and that your assets were about to be seized by the government. Your mortgage instantly became toxic debt. And banks do not hold on to toxic debt, Marcus. They sell it off to the highest bidder for pennies on the dollar to recoup their losses." Marcus's confident smile began to falter. His eyes darted down to the paperwork in his hand, rapidly scanning the dense legal text. "They auctioned your debt at midnight last night." I continued, my voice rising slightly to ensure every word struck him like a physical blow. "They dumped your mortgage onto the distressed asset market, and an anonymous private equity fund swooped in and bought the entire note in cash." Marcus swallowed hard, the veins in his neck standing out in sharp relief. "Who?" he demanded, his voice losing its booming authority. "Who bought it?" I tilted my head, looking at him with absolute profound pity. I did, Marcus. He froze. I have spent the last 10 years quietly investing my federal salary and consulting fees into an anonymous blind trust, I explained, watching the color drain entirely from his face. A trust that you never knew about because you never bothered to ask about my finances. You were too busy mocking my government job to realize I was building my own wealth. Early this morning, my fund purchased your defaulted mortgage. I am not just the managing director of the shell company that leases this space. I am the sole owner of the debt you defaulted on. I am your bank. I am your creditor. And as of 6 o'clock this morning, I initiated an immediate total foreclosure on this property. You do not own anything here, Marcus. You are a trespasser standing in my lobby. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute. The concierge behind the brass desk had stopped breathing. The sheriff shifted his weight casually, resting his hand on his utility belt. But the most dramatic shift in the room was not coming from Marcus. It was coming from the woman standing right behind him. Vanessa had been listening to every single word. I watched her perfectly manicured posture dissolve. The dawning realization spreading across her beautiful face was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Marcus, then looked at the eviction notice in his trembling hands. The fantasy world she had bought into was evaporating right in front of her eyes. She was a woman who had calculated her entire life around trading her youth and beauty for absolute financial security. She had tolerated Marcus's massive ego because he provided a $3 million penthouse imported champagne and a platinum credit card. Is it true? Vanessa asked, her voice sharp and trembling. Marcus turned to her, his eyes wide with sudden panic. Baby, listen to me, he stammered, reaching out to grab her arm. It is just a temporary setback. My lawyers are going to freeze her trust. I have other accounts. I have friends in the industry who will bail me out. We are fine. We just need to go to a hotel for a few days until this blows over. Vanessa violently jerked her arm away from his grasp, as if his touch physically repulsed her. A hotel, she practically shrieked, stepping backward. You are broke. You do not have any other accounts, Marcus. The news said the federal government seized everything. They took your firm. They took your offshore money. And now your mousy little ex-wife just took the roof over my head. Vanessa, you do not understand, he pleaded, the desperation completely destroying whatever was left of his arrogant facade. I did all of this for us. I built this empire so I could give you the world. I love you. You are a pathetic failure. She spat, the venom in her voice echoing through the marble lobby. You told me you were untouchable. You told me you were the smartest man in Atlanta. You are nothing but a cheap fraud who got outsmarted by a government desk clerk. You dragged me into this mess. You put my face on the local news. You ruined my reputation. I'm not going down with a sinking ship. Yo. She reached up and grabbed the heavy diamond pendant necklace resting against her collarbone. With a fierce yank, she broke the delicate gold chain. She threw it directly at Marcus's chest. It hit him and clattered onto the marble floor. Next, she tore the solid gold Patek Philippe watch from her wrist, the one he had proudly flaunted on social media just weeks ago, and hurled it at his feet. Finally, she looked down at the massive 5-carat flawless diamond engagement ring glittering on her left hand. She slid it over her knuckle and looked Marcus dead in the eyes. Her expression was completely devoid of any affection or humanity. It was the cold, calculating look of a predator who realized the prey had no meat left on its bones. You are broke, Marcus, she said, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. And I do not do broke. She threw the diamond ring, hitting him square in the face. He stumbled back, bringing his hands up defensively as the ring bounced off his cheekbone and rolled away across the floor. He looked entirely broken, a man who had sacrificed his marriage, his career, and his freedom for a woman who discarded him the exact second his wallet went empty. Vanessa did not even wait to watch the ring stop rolling. She turned on her heel, adjusting the strap of her $30,000 Hermes crocodile bag over her shoulder, and began marching straight toward the revolving glass doors. She was already mentally calculating her next move, already preparing to find another wealthy target to fund her lifestyle. Sheriff, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air with sharp authority. The armed deputy stepped smoothly into Vanessa's path, blocking the glass exit doors. Vanessa stopped short, glaring at the officer before turning her furious gaze toward me. "Get out of my way," she demanded, her tone shifting back into that entitled, arrogant whine she used when she felt superior. "I have nothing to do with his corporate fraud. I was just his girlfriend. You got your revenge. You got your apartment back. Now call off your guard dogs and let me leave." I slowly walked over to where the diamond ring, the gold watch, and the broken necklace lay scattered across the Italian marble. I nudged the 5-carat diamond with the toe of my shoe. "You really should have paid closer attention to where your sugar daddy was getting his cash." "Vanessa," I said, pulling a secondary file from my briefcase. "Did you honestly think a mid-level CFO could afford a $30,000 crocodile bag on a legitimate salary?" I held up a thick stack of federal banking records. "Every single piece of jewelry you are wearing, every designer bag in your closet, and that Hermes purse currently hanging on your shoulder was purchased using a specific offshore routing number," I explained, watching the arrogant defiance drain entirely from her face. "That routing number is directly tied to a human trafficking syndicate. Those are stolen federal funds, Vanessa. Marcus did not buy those gifts with his own money. He bought them with laundered cash." Vanessa took a shaky step backward, clutching the designer bag tightly against her side. I did not know that she stammered, her voice pitching upward in sudden terror. "I just thought he was rich. You cannot hold me responsible for where the money came from." "Actually, the federal government absolutely can," I replied, offering the banking records to the sheriff. "Ignorance is not a defense when you are draped in the proceeds of a federal crime. By accepting and maintaining possession of those items, you are officially in possession of stolen illicit assets. You are an accessory after the fact to international money laundering." I looked at the sheriff and gave a slight nod. The sheriff stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. The metallic click echoed loudly in the quiet lobby. "Vanessa Hastings," the sheriff said, his voice deep and entirely uncompromising. "You are under arrest for the receipt and possession of stolen property and suspicion of acting as an accessory to federal wire fraud. Please place your hands behind your back." Vanessa let out a piercing, horrified scream, dropping the $30,000 bag. As the deputy grabbed her arms and spun her around, the trap had snapped perfectly shut, leaving no exits and no survivors. I returned to the federal field office and barely had time to hang up my trench coat before the heavy oak door to my temporary suite violently slammed open. The wood rebounded off the wall with a deafening crack that echoed down the quiet hallway. Standing in the threshold, breathing heavily and clutching a shattered designer sunglasses frame, was Nia. Marcus's younger sister had always prided herself on maintaining an aura of unbothered aristocratic grace. She was the pristine princess of the Hastings family, the one who had married the wealthy investment banker and spent her days hosting charity luncheons. Today she looked like a wild animal cornered in a trap. Her silk blouse was torn at the shoulder, her hair was in disarray, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, manic energy. Before the two armed security contractors stationed down the hall could grab her, I raised my hand and signaled for them to stand down. I wanted to handle this myself. I stepped behind my large mahogany desk and folded my arms, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Nia lunged into the room, completely unhinged. With a vicious sweep of her arm, she cleared my desk entirely. Stacks of preliminary case files, heavy glass coffee mugs, and a brass pen holder crashed to the floor in a chaotic clatter of breaking glass and sliding paper. She slammed her hands down on the bare wood, leaning over the desk with a face contorted by absolute fury. "You are going to fix this right now," Nia screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are going to pick up that phone, call your supervisors, and tell them you made a mistake. You are going to tell them you fabricated the documents. I do not care if you want to burn Marcus to the ground, but you are going to leave Bryce out of this." I looked down at the shattered glass pooling around my leather boots, then slowly brought my gaze back up to meet her wild eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. "You drove all the way to a secure federal building, bypassed the front desk, and assaulted a government office just to throw a temper tantrum, Nia," I asked, my tone completely devoid of emotion. "You are lucky I waved off the guards, or you would be in a holding cell right next to your brother." Bryce has nothing to do with Marcus's syndicates, she shrieked, ignoring my warning entirely. She paced back and forth in front of the desk, pulling at her hair. He is a legitimate wealth manager. He comes from a respectable family. You just dragged his name into your little revenge plot because you are a jealous, bitter nobody. You always hated us, Maya. You always hated that we were born into excellence while you had to claw your way out of the dirt. You are trying to destroy my marriage because your own husband realized you were not good enough for him. I let her vent. I stood perfectly still and let her hurl every classist insult she had memorized over the past decade. Nia had always been the most delusional member of the Hastings family. She genuinely believed her husband Bryce was a paragon of corporate virtue. She believed he had married her for love and elevated her family's wealth out of the goodness of his heart. She was entirely blind to the fact that she was nothing more than a convenient stepping stone for a ruthless financial predator. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly, when she finally paused to catch her breath. "Withdraw the evidence." Nia demanded, her voice shaking as she pointed a finger at my chest. "Withdraw the files on Bryce, or I swear to God I will spend the rest of my life making sure you suffer. He is an innocent man. He trusted Marcus, and Marcus manipulated his accounts. Bryce did not know anything about the offshore money laundering. He promised me he had no idea." I let out a slow, measured breath. It was almost pathetic watching her desperately cling to the illusion of her perfect husband. She was so desperate to preserve her country club lifestyle that she was willing to completely ignore the basic reality of her own bank accounts. "You really are your mother's daughter, Nia," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You wrap yourself in expensive clothes and pretend the world bends to your will, but you are completely, willfully ignorant of how the men in your life actually operate. Bryce is not a victim. Bryce is not innocent. Bryce is the architect." Nia froze, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus is arrogant and reckless," I explained, keeping my voice steady and clinical. "But he does not have the sophisticated international connections required to set up a multi-layered offshore laundering syndicate. Marcus is a glorified middleman. He needed a legitimate front, a clean white-collar face with access to international private equity. He needed your husband. Bryce married you, Nia, because the Hastings family possessed exactly what he required. You had liquid capital, a desperate need for social validation, and an absolute blindness to corporate fraud." "That is a lie," Nia spat, slamming her hand against the wall. "Bryce loves me. He manages our portfolio perfectly. He has doubled our family wealth." "He doubled your wealth by funneling cartel cash through your personal trusts," I countered sharply, stepping around the desk and closing the distance between us. "He used your name, Nia. He used your mother's historical estate and your private charity foundations to wash millions of dollars of dirty money. He turned your entire family into a criminal enterprise while smiling at you across the dinner table." She shook her head violently, refusing to let the words penetrate her denial. "No, you are making this up. You are trying to break my spirit. Bryce would never use me like that. He respects my family. He told me Marcus was a genius. He told me we were building a dynasty together." I stared at her for a long moment, watching the absolute terror fighting against the stubborn denial in her eyes. I walked back to my computer monitor, which had miraculously survived her rampage. I typed in my decryption password and opened a highly classified audio file. It was a wiretap intercept recorded 3 months ago during a private call between Bryce and a senior partner at his investment firm. "I think you need to hear exactly how much your husband respects your family," I said, reaching over and pressing the play button on the desktop speakers. The audio was crisp and clear. The background noise of a busy luxury restaurant, clinking glasses and soft jazz, was easily overpowered by the sound of Bryce's distinct, arrogant voice. "Do not worry about Marcus." Bryce's voice echoed through my office, dripping with absolute condescension. "He is entirely under control. These nouveau riche black families are all exactly the same. They are so desperate for corporate validation and a seat at the big table that they will sign absolutely anything you slide across the mahogany desk. Marcus thinks he is a titan of industry, but he is just a glorified street hustler in a Tom Ford suit. He is the perfect fall guy." There was a pause on the recording, followed by a cruel, dismissive laugh from Bryce. "And the sister Nia, She is even easier to handle. Bryce's recorded voice continued slicing through the quiet room like a scalpel. Buy her a diamond tennis bracelet and a new Porsche, and she will let you leverage her entire trust fund without asking a single financial question. They are just nouveau riche black people who are easily exploited. When the federal authorities finally catch the scent, I will simply pack up my clean assets and let the Hastings family take the entire blast radius. They will go to federal prison, and I will be sitting on a beach in Monaco. I reached over and pressed the stop button. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy and suffocating. Nia was not screaming anymore. She was not throwing paperweights or making threats. She was standing perfectly still, staring at the black computer speakers. Her face was the color of ash. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The pristine fantasy she had built her entire identity around had just been incinerated in less than 60 seconds. The man she shared a bed with, the man she had come here to fiercely protect, viewed her as nothing more than an exploitable racial and financial stereotype. He called us targets, Nia whispered, her voice hollow and completely broken. He said he was going to let us take the blast radius. He has been setting you up for 3 years, I said, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the woman standing in front of me. He structured every single fraudulent transaction to leave a paper trail leading directly back to Marcus, to your mother, and to you. He built an escape hatch out of your family's destruction. Nia slowly sank into the leather guest chair, her legs seemingly unable to support her weight anymore. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a quiet, ragged sob. I will testify against him, she cried, her voice muffled by her trembling fingers. I will give you everything. I know where he keeps his private ledgers. I know the passwords to his home safe. I will help you put him in prison, Maya. I will destroy him. I leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing my arms and looking down at the broken woman in front of me. It was almost poetic how quickly the Hastings family turned on each other the moment the money disappeared. You cannot testify against him, Nia, I stated, my voice perfectly flat. Nia looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. Why not? I am his wife. I know everything. I can be your star witness. I can help the federal government convict him. Because the federal government does not need your help, I explained, delivering the final crushing blow with absolute precision. Bryce knew the net was closing in 2 weeks ago. When he realized I was auditing the secondary offshore accounts, he panicked. He did exactly what he promised to do on that audio recording. He protected himself. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Yesterday afternoon, while you were busy shopping for a new gala dress, Bryce walked into the Department of Justice. I continued watching, her eyes widen in renewed terror. He brought 30 boxes of physical evidence. He brought hard drives, encrypted emails, and recorded phone calls. He handed the federal prosecutors a complete map of the entire money laundering syndicate. Every transaction, every shell company, every signature Marcus ever forged. Nia shook her head, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. No, he would not do that. Bryce signed a full cooperation agreement with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I said, dropping the document onto the desk right in front of her. He officially became a cooperating federal witness against your brother. He threw Marcus, your mother, and you completely under the bus to save his own skin. And in exchange for handing over the entire Hastings family on a silver platter, the Department of Justice granted Bryce absolute blanket immunity. He is walking away untouched, Nia. He is not going to prison. You are. I left Nia sitting in the leather guest chair, her manicured hands covering her face, as the reality of her impending federal indictment finally shattered her carefully constructed delusion. The sound of her ragged, heavy sobbing echoed off the walls of my office, a stark contrast to the arrogant threats she had been screaming just moments before. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a comforting word. I simply picked up my briefcase, walked out of the room, and closed the heavy oak door behind me, leaving her alone with the ashes of her perfect life. There was no time to celebrate the collapse of Bryce and Nia's fraudulent marriage. My secure work phone vibrated in my pocket before I even reached the elevator bank. It was a priority alert from Agent Miller. While we had successfully frozen the primary corporate accounts and seized the Sovereign Tower penthouse, Beatrice Hastings was proving to be exactly like a cornered venomous snake. She was wounded, desperate, and lashing out with the only weapon she had left. Despite her son being out on a high-risk bail and her own historic estate being seized by the government, Beatrice was moving forward with the annual Hastings Legacy Foundation Gala. It was an act of breathtaking audacity. The gala was the crown jewel of the Atlanta Elite social calendar, a highly publicized black tie event where billionaires, politicians, and socialites gathered to write massive checks under the guise of philanthropy. Beatrice was using a temporary legal loophole. The foundation was registered as a separate 501c3 nonprofit organization, meaning its operational accounts had not been caught in the initial wave of asset freezes. Beatrice was turning the charity gala into a desperate survival tactic. She was going to use the evening to control the public narrative, paint me as an unstable, vindictive ex-wife, and solicit millions of dollars in emergency donations to silently fund Marcus's exorbitant legal defense. She wanted a war of public perception. She was going to get a federal execution. I did not go home to rest. I went straight to my apartment and prepared for the evening. I bypassed the conservative navy suits I wore for federal audits and pulled a stunning floor-length emerald green evening gown from the back of my closet. The silk draped perfectly elegant but commanding. I pinned my hair back into a sleek, severe style, applied a bold crimson lipstick, and slipped my federal badge and identification into a slim, black velvet clutch. I was not walking into that ballroom as a scorned daughter-in-law. I was walking in as the grim reaper of the Hastings financial empire. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a monument to absolute excess. As I stepped out of my vehicle and walked past the valet stand, I could hear the gentle hum of a live string quartet floating through the crisp night air. Inside the venue was dripping in wealth. Towering arrangements of white orchids and imported roses sat atop every table. Crystal champagne flutes clinked in the hands of politicians, judges, and corporate titans. It was a room filled with people who believed their money made them entirely untouchable. At the center of it all, standing on a raised, beautifully illuminated stage, was Beatrice. She wore a breathtaking silver-beaded gown that caught the spotlight with every movement. She looked regal, composed, and tragically brave. She was holding a microphone, speaking to the silent, captivated crowd with a voice thick with manufactured sorrow. "We all know the burden of success," Beatrice was saying, placing a hand over her heart as she looked out at her wealthy peers. "We all know what it is like to be targeted by those who envy our legacy. My family is currently enduring a vicious, coordinated attack. A jealous, unstable woman, a woman we welcomed into our home and treated as our own, is using her bureaucratic position to wage a personal vendetta against my son. She is trying to tear down everything the Hastings family has built for this community. But we will not be broken. We will not let petty jealousy destroy our philanthropic mission." The crowd murmured in sympathetic agreement. A few women dabbed at their eyes. Men in tuxedos nodded gravely, completely buying into the narrative of the victimized elite. It was time to end the show. I stepped fully into the light of the ballroom. I did not sneak in through the back. I walked directly down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a loud, definitive thud. The movement caught the attention of the guests near the entrance. The polite murmurs suddenly stopped. A ripple of whispers rushed through the crowd as people parted to make way for me. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my eyes locked dead onto the woman standing on the stage. Beatrice stopped mid-sentence. The microphone dropped slightly from her lips. Her practiced, sorrowful expression shattered instantly, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the podium. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice losing its smooth, aristocratic cadence and rising into a sharp, panicked shrill. "Security! Security, remove this woman immediately! She is a trespasser. She is the deranged individual I was just speaking about. Get her out of this ballroom right now. 4 large private security guards in dark suits immediately stepped out from the shadows, moving to intercept me. They were massive, imposing men paid handsomely to keep the unwanted masses away from the billionaires. I did not stop walking. I did not even slow my pace. I unclasped my velvet clutch, reached inside, and pulled out my federal identification. I held the gold shield up high, the brilliant light of the chandeliers, catching the seal of the Federal Audit Committee. Federal Agent Maya Wilson. I announced, my voice cutting through the silent ballroom with the sharp, devastating force of a whip. Interfere with a federal investigation, and I will have every single one of you arrested for obstruction of justice before you can even reach for your radios. The security guards froze instantly. They looked at the gold shield, looked at my completely uncompromising expression, and immediately backed away, raising their hands in surrender. Private security did not mess with federal agents. Beatrice was hyperventilating. She gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward like a cornered predator. "You have no jurisdiction here, Maya," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is a private charity event. You are abusing your power to settle a petty domestic dispute. Look at her, everyone. Look at the absolute desperation of a woman who could not keep her husband happy. She is trying to ruin a charity gala because she is bitter and alone." She turned to the crowd, desperately trying to rally the elite class solidarity she relied on. "Do not listen to her. She is a rogue employee. She is a nobody trying to steal our legacy." I reached the front of the room and gracefully walked up the short flight of stairs directly onto the stage. I stopped inches from Beatrice. She reeked of expensive perfume and cold sweat. "I am not here as a scorned wife, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice low but perfectly audible to the entire room. "I am here as the lead forensic auditor for the Department of Justice. And I am not here to ruin a charity. I am here to dismantle a crime syndicate." I stepped around her, completely ignoring her furious, sputtering protests, and stepped up to the microphone on the podium. I looked out over the sea of wealthy, influential faces. I saw CEOs with their checkbooks already sitting on the tables. I saw local politicians looking suddenly nervous. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing loudly through the massive sound system, "I strongly advise you to put your checkbooks away. Do not sign a single document tonight. Do not transfer a single dollar into the Hastings Legacy Foundation accounts." Beatrice lunged toward me, trying to grab the microphone. "Turn it off!" she screamed to the audio technicians in the back. "Turn her microphone off right now." I easily sidestepped her frantic grab, keeping my grip firm on the podium. "You have all been told that your donations tonight are going toward building community centers and funding educational scholarships," I continued, my voice rising with absolute commanding authority. "You have been told that you are supporting a noble cause. You have been lied to. The Hastings Legacy Foundation has not funded a single legitimate charitable project in over 4 years." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The absolute shock on the faces of the billionaires was palpable. "This foundation is not a charity," I declared, looking directly into the camera crews that Beatrice had hired to cover the event. "It is a highly sophisticated, completely fraudulent shell corporation. It is the final transit hub for Marcus Hastings' international money laundering syndicate. The money you donate tonight does not go to the community. It goes directly into the same offshore accounts used to wash cartel cash, illegal gambling revenues, and stolen federal funds." Beatrice let out a strangled, horrified scream. She realized in that exact moment that I was not just burning her social status to the ground. I was burning her entire legal defense. "For years, Beatrice and Marcus Hastings have used your goodwill, your trust, and your wealth to mask their criminal enterprise," I said, delivering the final, devastating blow. "They are currently under federal indictment for wire fraud, racketeering, and grand larceny. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently obtaining the warrants to seize every single asset tied to this foundation." I looked down at the crowd, letting the heavy, suffocating reality of my words settle over the room. I saw billionaires quietly slipping their checkbooks back into their tuxedo pockets. I saw politicians discreetly stepping away from the tables, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. "So I will offer you all one final piece of federal advice," I concluded, my tone dropping to a quiet, dangerous whisper that commanded absolute silence. If you write a check to Beatrice Hastings tonight, you are no longer a charitable donor. You are knowingly funding an active criminal syndicate. You are officially becoming an unindicted co-conspirator to federal money laundering. And I promise you, I will personally audit every single one of your accounts by sunrise. Keep your money, keep your freedom, and leave this building. The silence broke not with a shout, but with the terrifying synchronized sound of survival. Chairs scraped violently against the imported marble floor. The rustle of expensive silk and the clinking of discarded crystal champagne flutes filled the air as Atlanta's elite scrambled to protect themselves. A prominent state senator sitting in the front row practically shoved his wife out of the way to reach the side exit. The wealthy benefactors who just moments ago were practically weeping over Beatrice's manufactured tale of victimhood now looked at her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Checkbooks were snapped shut. Gold fountain pens were shoved hastily back into tuxedo pockets. The mass exodus was clinical, ruthless, and entirely silent. Beatrice stood at this podium, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The silver-beaded gown that had looked so regal 5 minutes earlier now hung on her shaking frame like a suit of armor made of cheap tin. She lunged forward, her manicured hands gripping the microphone stand so hard her knuckles turned a mottled purple. "Do not walk away from me," she shrieked, the sound tearing through the elegant ballroom. "You know me. You know my family. We belong to the same clubs. We sit on the same hospital boards. You cannot listen to this ghetto trash." She is lying, her voice cracked, degenerating into a guttural, desperate screech. "We are the Hastings family. We built this city." I watched from the edge of the stage, my expression completely neutral, as her world disintegrated in real time. A tall, distinguished woman, dripping in diamonds. Eleanor Vance, a pharmaceutical heiress, and Beatrice's closest confidant for the past 20 years, was hurrying down the center aisle. Beatrice spotted her and practically threw herself off the stage, catching the hem of Eleanor's velvet wrap. "Eleanor, tell them," Beatrice pleaded, her perfect hair coming undone, strands sticking to the cold sweat on her face. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding. We have dinner reservations on Thursday. Call your husband's legal team. We need to fix this." Eleanor stopped. She did not offer a comforting hand. She looked down at Beatrice's clutching fingers with absolute unfiltered disgust. She physically yanked her velvet wrap out of Beatrice's grasp, smoothing the fabric with a trembling hand. "Do not ever contact me again, Beatrice." Eleanor said, her voice dripping with venomous self-preservation. "And if my name appears anywhere near a federal subpoena, I will personally ensure you never see the outside of a prison cell." Eleanor turned and marched out, joining the frantic crowd, bottlenecking at the main doors, leaving Beatrice kneeling on the marble floor. It was a masterclass in elite betrayal. These people did not care about loyalty. They cared about their stock portfolios and their freedom. Watching Beatrice realize that her entire social identity was a transactional illusion was profoundly satisfying. She scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a manic, cornered desperation. She turned her vitriol back to me, stalking toward the stage with her fists clenched. "You think you have won?" She spat, her face contorted into a mask of pure ugliness. "You think destroying my charity makes you something special? You are still nothing, Maya. You will always be a bottom-feeding parasite who had to marry into money because you were too incompetent to make your own. I will ruin you. I will spend my last dying breath destroying your life and your career." I did not even have to respond. The consequences of her actions were already in motion. The general manager of the St. Regis, accompanied by 4 hotel security guards, stepped onto the ballroom floor. They bypassed me entirely and walked straight to Beatrice. Mrs. Hastings, the manager, said, his tone devoid of the sycophantic warmth he usually reserved for her. "I am going to have to ask you to vacate the premises immediately." Beatrice whipped her head around, staring at the manager as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me," she hissed. "I rented this ballroom. I am the host of this gala. You work for me tonight. Your credit card on file for tonight's event was just declined." The manager stated, his voice carrying perfectly across the rapidly emptying room. All of your associated accounts have been flagged by the federal government. You are currently trespassing on hotel property, and given the nature of the federal agent's presence, the hotel management considers you a severe liability. You need to leave now, or I will authorize my men to physically escort you out into the street. It was the ultimate inescapable humiliation. Beatrice Hastings, the woman who had tormented me for years, who had thrown me out into the freezing rain, who had laughed at my working-class roots, was being kicked out of her own high society gala for insufficient funds. Her mouth trembled. She looked around the cavernous, empty ballroom. The string quartet had long since packed up their instruments and fled. The tables of untouched caviar and champagne stood as mocking monuments to her ruined empire. Her shoulders finally slumped. The fight completely drained out of her, replaced by the crushing weight of absolute ruin. She turned her silver gown dragging heavily across the floor and allowed the hotel security to march her toward the service elevators in the back. She did not look back. I stood on the stage, the heavy silence of the empty ballroom washing over me. The operation was a complete success. The syndicate was dismantled. The financial lifelines were severed. The enablers were neutralized. I reached into my clutch, preparing to text Agent Miller that the foundation accounts were successfully isolated and the donors had been warned. Then the heavy oak double doors at the main entrance burst open with a violently loud crash. The wood splintered against the brass stops, echoing like a gunshot through the massive room. I snapped my head up. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light of the corridor, was Marcus. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant executive I had confronted in the Sovereign Tower lobby just days ago. His designer suit was deeply wrinkled and stained. His tie was missing, his shirt collar ripped open. But it was his face that sent a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline straight through my veins. His eyes were completely bloodshot, sunken deep into his skull, burning with a deranged, feral intensity. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he scanned the empty ballroom, until his gaze locked onto me standing on the stage. He stepped into the room, kicking the heavy oak doors shut behind him. He did not have a weapon in his hand. He had something far more dangerous. In his right fist, he gripped a thick, heavily sealed manila folder. It was stamped with red ink, the kind of secure markings used exclusively for deeply classified corporate filings. "You took everything," Marcus growled, his voice a jagged, raspy rasp that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "You took my money. You took my house. You took my mother's legacy. You took the only woman who actually respected me. You thought you could just neatly box me up and hand me over to the feds while you walked away the hero." He began stalking down the center aisle, closing the distance between us with heavy, predatory steps. I slid my hand slowly into my trench coat pocket, my fingers wrapping around the cold steel of my tactical flashlight, calculating the distance between myself and the side exit. "I warned you, Maya," he shouted, raising the sealed folder high in the air, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. "I told you that if you backed me into a corner, I would not go down alone. You think you know everything about my finances. You think you mapped the entire syndicate, but you missed the bedrock." He stopped at the edge of the stage, glaring up at me with a smile that was entirely psychotic. "This file," Marcus spat, tapping the heavy manila envelope against the wooden stage, "contains the original, unredacted offshore incorporation documents from 5 years ago. The ones from before we were even married. The ones that established the very first shell company I ever built to move cartel cash." My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my face blank, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing my concern, but my mind was racing through every single ledger I had audited. "Do you want to know whose signature is on the primary beneficiary line, Maya?" he asked, a manic, breathless laugh escaping his throat. "Do you want to know whose social security number is permanently tied to the foundational account of a federal money laundering enterprise? It is yours. I forged your name the day we met. I tied you to the cartel cash before you even said I do." He slammed the file down onto the edge of the stage, his bloodshot eyes burning into mine. "You are not the federal hero, Maya," he whispered, the sound carrying a terrifying absolute certainty. "You are the co-founder of this syndicate. And if I am going to federal prison, I am dragging you straight to hell with me." I stared at the thick manila folder resting against the edge of the stage, my mind rapidly assessing the immediate threat. Marcus was unhinged, operating entirely on pure cornered adrenaline. The massive grand ballroom was empty, but the doors to the service corridors were still propped open, and the distant sounds of the hotel staff cleaning up the lobby echoed in the background. This was not the place for an extortion demand. Marcus knew it too. He snatched the folder off the stage, his knuckles white, and grabbed my elbow with a bruising grip. "We are going to talk in private," he snarled, his hot breath smelling of stale scotch and raw panic. He did not give me a chance to protest. He yanked me forward, pulling me off the stage and shoving me through a set of heavy mahogany doors that led into the hotel's executive management suite. The room was dark, soundproofed, and furnished with plush leather sofas and a massive polished oak desk. He slammed the doors shut behind us and locked the deadbolt with a sharp metallic click. We were completely isolated. Marcus marched over to the center of the room and violently swept a decorative vase off the oak desk. It shattered against the wall, but neither of us flinched. He slapped the manila folder down onto the smooth wood and ripped it open, spreading a dozen heavily stamped notarized financial documents across the surface. "Look at them," he demanded, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling finger at the pages. "Look at the bedrock of your destruction, Maya." I stepped slowly toward the desk, keeping my posture rigid. I looked down at the paperwork. My eyes quickly scanned the dense legal jargon, the offshore banking codes, and the official incorporation stamps from the Cayman Islands. It was the founding charter for Apex Holdings, the primary shell company, at the very center of his international money laundering syndicate. And there, right on the line, designating the sole primary beneficiary and managing director, was my name, my social security number, my exact flawless signature. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over my brain, but I knew exactly what this situation required. Marcus was a textbook narcissist whose ego had just been publicly obliterated. He needed to feel powerful. He needed to believe he had the upper hand. If I challenged him now, he would act erratically. If I played the victim, he would reveal his entire hand. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid, mimicking the exact physiological signs of a panic attack. I widened my eyes and allowed my hands to visibly tremble as I reached out to touch the forged signature. How I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "How did you do this, Marcus?" Marcus let out a cruel, triumphant laugh. He loved seeing me broken. He practically fed on the illusion of my terror. "It was almost too easy, Maya," he sneered, circling the desk like a predator admiring its trapped prey. "Do you remember our honeymoon in St. Bart's? Do you remember how much champagne you drank that second night? You slept for 12 hours straight. While you were passed out in the luxury suite I paid for, I was sitting on the balcony with your passport, your federal identification, and a stack of incorporation papers. I spent hours practicing the exact curve of your signature. I built the entire syndicate around your identity before we even flew back to Atlanta." I stumbled backward, hitting the back of a leather guest chair, and let out a shaky gasp. "You set me up from the very beginning. You married me just to use my federal clearance as a shield." "You were a convenient insurance policy," he corrected, leaning over the desk and invading my personal space. "The feds were never going to look closely at a mid-level desk clerk. And if they did, the paper trail would show that you were the mastermind. Not me. Not my mother. You. A greedy, ambitious federal employee who used her insider knowledge to wash illegal cash." He tapped the documents with a manic, obsessive energy. "These papers are perfect, Maya. The digital footprints, the notary seals, the offshore routing numbers. If I mail this folder to the Department of Justice Inspector General right now, your career is over. They will strip your badge, seize your blind trust, and throw you in a federal penitentiary for 20 years. You will lose absolutely everything." I covered my mouth with my hand, forcing a single desperate tear to spill over my eyelashes. "Please, Marcus," I begged, my voice thick with manufactured terror. "Please, you cannot do this. My entire life is built on my reputation. If the Bureau sees those files, I will never recover. They will lock me away." Marcus smiled. The dark, hollow shadows under his bloodshot eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by a surge of pure, intoxicating power. He believed he had finally broken the Ice Queen. He believed he had won. "I am a reasonable man, Maya," he said, adjusting the lapels of his ruined suit jacket with a sudden arrogant calm. "I do not actually want to see my beautiful ex-wife rotting in a federal cell. But I am currently out on bail, my assets are frozen, and my dear sister Nia just informed me that Bryce has completely sold me out to the FBI. I have no liquid cash, and I have federal agents breathing down my neck." He walked around the desk, standing just inches from me. "I need $5 million, he stated, his voice dropping into a cold, uncompromising demand. "I know you have it. You practically bragged about your little blind trust when you foreclosed on my penthouse. I want $5 million transferred into an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet by tomorrow night." I shook my head frantically, backing away until my shoulders hit the wall. $5 million. Marcus, I cannot move that kind of liquidity in 24 hours. The banking alerts alone would trigger a massive internal audit. The federal oversight committees monitor transfers of that size. I need time. "You do not have time," he barked, slamming his fist against the wall right next to my head. "I am leaving the country, Maya. I have a private charter waiting at a secondary airstrip outside the city. The moment the funds clear, the crypto wallet, I am flying to Dubai. There is no extradition treaty. I will take my money, I will disappear, and I will mail you the original copies of these forged documents. You get your precious reputation back, and I get my freedom." "Please," I cried, letting my knees buckle slightly so I had to lean against the wall for support. "Just give me 48 hours. I need to route the money through secondary holding accounts so the IRS does not flag the transfer. If you give me 2 days, I swear I will get you the money. Just do not send those files to the Bureau." Marcus looked down at me with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He thrived on my apparent weakness. It validated every deeply held misogynistic belief he harbored. "You have exactly 24 hours, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Tomorrow at midnight, the window closes. If the $5 million is not in the account, I am walking into the local FBI field office, dropping this folder on the front desk, and telling them I want to cut a deal by turning in the real mastermind." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small slip of paper with a long string of alphanumeric characters, and threw it at my feet. "There is the wallet address, Maya. Tick-tock. Do not make the biggest mistake of your life." Without another word, Marcus turned on his heel, unlocked the heavy oak doors, and marched out of the executive suite. The heavy door swung shut behind him, the latch clicking firmly into place. I remained slumped against the wall for exactly 3 seconds, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. The moment the corridor fell entirely silent, the terrified, broken expression vanished from my face. My breathing instantly slowed, returning to a steady, clinical rhythm. I straightened my posture, smoothed out the wrinkles in my emerald green gown, and wiped the single fake tear from my cheek with the back of my hand. I walked calmly over to the heavy oak desk and knelt down on the plush carpet. I reached underneath the thick wooden overhang, running my fingers along the hidden underside of the desk until I felt a small square piece of heavy-duty adhesive tape. I pulled it free. Attached to the tape was a high-frequency military-grade audio and video transmitter no larger than a matchbox. A tiny green light blinked steadily in the center of the device, confirming the connection was active and secure. I brought the microphone up to my lips, pressing the receiver switch on my discreet earpiece. "Miller," I said, my voice sharp, professional, and completely devoid of any fear. "Tell me the recording came through clean." A burst of static crackled in my ear, followed by the deep, highly amused voice of Special Agent Miller. He was sitting in a mobile surveillance van, parked less than 2 blocks away, surrounded by a team of federal prosecutors and IRS criminal investigators. Loud and clear, Maya Miller replied, the satisfaction evident in his tone. "Audio is pristine. Video caught the documents and his face perfectly. We have him explicitly admitting to identity theft, federal forgery, framing a federal agent, extortion, and attempting to flee federal jurisdiction to a non-extradition country." I looked down at the slip of paper Marcus had thrown at my feet, noting the cryptocurrency wallet address. He actually thought he was the smartest man in the room. He actually believed he had cornered a federal forensic auditor without anticipating that the entire room was wired. "What is the play, Miller?" I asked, walking over to the desk and picking up the forged documents. "The play is over," Miller stated firmly. He just violated the terms of his high-risk bail by attempting to extort a federal officer and confessing to a flight risk plan. "The judge just signed the emergency revocation order 2 minutes ago. We are moving in." I stacked the forged documents neatly into the manila folder, securing the evidence of his final fatal mistake. I grabbed my velvet clutch, checked my reflection in the dark window glass, and walked out of the executive suite, ready to watch Marcus Hastings lose his freedom forever. 72 hours later, the heavy mahogany doors of courtroom 4B sealed shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the cavernous federal building. The atmosphere inside the room was thick with a suffocating tension. Marcus sat at the defense table, but he was no longer wearing the bespoke Italian suits he used to flaunt across the financial district. He was dressed in a standard-issue bright orange federal jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to a chain around his waist. His emergency bail had been revoked the moment Agent Miller presented the audio and video recordings of our hotel encounter to the judge. Marcus was officially a flight risk and an extortionist, but his arrogance had not yet entirely evaporated. He leaned close to his high-priced defense attorney, whispering frantically. Behind him in the first row of the gallery sat the remnants of the Hastings Empire. Beatrice wore a conservative but impeccably tailored charcoal Chanel suit, her posture rigid, and her chin tilted upward in an aggressive display of aristocratic defiance. Nia sat beside her, clutching a leather designer handbag. As I took my seat at the prosecution table next to lead prosecutor Sarah Hughes and Agent Miller, I felt the heat of their collective glares burning into the side of my face. When I briefly turned my head to meet their gaze, Beatrice offered a cold, triumphant smirk. Nia caught my eye and silently mouthed the words, "You are finished." They genuinely believed this was the day the narrative would flip. They believed the millions of dollars they were paying their legal team would be enough to outsmart the federal government. They had no idea they were sitting directly in the blast zone. "Your Honor, if it please," the court began. Richard Sterling, Marcus's lead defense attorney. Sterling was a man famous for manipulating corporate loopholes and confusing juries with aggressive theatrics. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, projecting absolute confidence. "The defense has filed an emergency motion to dismiss all federal charges against my client Marcus Hastings. Furthermore, we are formally requesting that the Department of Justice immediately open a criminal investigation into the lead forensic auditor on this case, Agent Maya Wilson." A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge, a stern, gray-haired man named Caldwell, peered over his reading glasses, peering down at Sterling with a deeply skeptical expression. "That is a rather spectacular claim, Mr. Sterling," Judge Caldwell noted, his voice rumbling through the microphone. "You are accusing a federal agent of fabricating a multi-million-dollar federal racketeering case against her own ex-husband. You had better possess extraordinary evidence to back up such an inflammatory motion in my courtroom." "We possess the absolute truth, Your Honor," Sterling declared, gesturing grandly toward Marcus, who was busy trying to look like a victimized martyr. "My client has been portrayed as the architect of an international money laundering syndicate, but he is entirely innocent. He is a pawn in a sophisticated scheme orchestrated by his ex-wife. Agent Wilson used her federal clearance, her knowledge of offshore banking regulations, and her intimate access to my client's personal life to build this criminal enterprise from the shadows. And when she realized her marriage was ending, she neatly framed my client to take the fall." Sterling dramatically reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out the exact same heavy manila folder Marcus had thrown at my feet in the St. Regis executive suite. "The defense submits Exhibit A into evidence," Sterling announced, walking the folder over to the judge's clerk. "These are the original foundational charter documents for Apex Holdings, the primary shell company at the center of this indictment. These documents clearly establish the sole primary beneficiary and managing director of the entire syndicate. The clerk handed the documents to the judge. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Caldwell adjusted his glasses and reviewed the paperwork. I did not move a muscle. I simply watched the blood drain slightly from Sterling's face when the judge finally looked up. The signature on this incorporation charter belongs to Agent Maya Wilson Sterling, announced, turning to point a dramatic finger directly at me. It is dated 5 years ago, long before any federal investigation began. My client found these hidden in a home safe and attempted to confront his ex-wife with them, which she quickly twisted into an extortion charge to keep him quiet. The evidence is undeniable. Maya Wilson is the true criminal mastermind. In the gallery, Beatrice leaned back against the wooden bench, practically glowing with supreme satisfaction. She reached over and patted Nia's knee. They thought the trap had perfectly snapped shut. They thought Marcus's forged documents would introduce enough reasonable doubt to shatter the prosecution's case and destroy my career in the process. Prosecutor Hughes stood up calmly, smoothing the front of her blazer. Your Honor, the prosecution has reviewed a digital copy of these documents, which Mr. Sterling was kind enough to submit to our office late last night. We do not object to their admission into evidence. In fact, we strongly encourage it. Sterling frowned, his theatrical momentum stalling. He had expected furious objections. He had expected me to panic. Instead, Hughes simply gestured toward the witness stand. To expedite this matter and address the defense's claims directly, the prosecution calls Agent Maya Wilson to the stand as our lead forensic expert, Hughes stated. Judge Caldwell nodded, gesturing for me to approach. I walked smoothly across the courtroom, stepped up to the polished wooden witness box, and placed my hand on the Bible to take the oath. As I sat down, I adjusted the microphone and looked directly at Marcus. The arrogant smirk on his face flickered, replaced by a sudden flash of profound uncertainty. Agent Wilson Hughes began standing at the podium. You have personally reviewed Defense Exhibit A, the Apex Holdings Incorporation documents. I have, I answered, my voice echoing with crisp, clinical precision. And does the signature on the primary beneficiary line appear to be yours? Hughes asked. Visually, it is a nearly perfect replication of my signature, I replied, folding my hands in my lap. However, the defense has made a critical error in relying exclusively on a visual assessment of a digital reproduction. In modern forensic auditing, we do not merely look at the ink on a page. We examine the invisible digital architecture that builds the document. I looked up at the judge. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to direct the court's attention to the prosecution's rebuttal exhibit, which contains the complete metadata analysis of the specific digital files Mr. Sterling just submitted. Judge Caldwell nodded, waving a hand for me to proceed. Let us see what you have, Agent Wilson. I turned my gaze toward the gallery, locking eyes with Beatrice before I delivered the killing blow. Every digital document leaves an invisible footprint. I explained clearly, ensuring every person in the room could understand the absolute finality of the science. This footprint is called metadata. It records exactly when a file was created, who authored it, when it was last modified, and the specific geographic location and device used to generate it. The defense claims these documents were drafted and signed 5 years ago at the inception of the money laundering syndicate. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to build the suffocating tension. The forensic metadata tells an entirely different story. I continued, my voice rising with uncompromising authority. The embedded digital timestamps confirm that these specific incorporation documents were completely fabricated and digitally generated exactly 4 days ago. Sterling physically recoiled, stepping back from his own table. Marcus's jaw dropped, his breathing suddenly ragged and audible in the quiet room. 4 days ago, Marcus Hastings' primary computers, his office network, and his personal servers had already been seized and secured by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I stated, watching the absolute horror spread across Marcus's face. He did not have access to the equipment necessary to forge these documents. So the forensic team pulled the digital tracking code to find out exactly where this fabricated evidence was created. I turned my full attention to the first row of the gallery. Beatrice's face was frozen in a mask of pure terror. The elegant composure she had maintained for decades was actively melting away. The metadata contains the exact IP address of the router used to download the forgery software and transmit the final PDF files to the defense attorney's office. I declared my words, striking the silent room like a hammer. That IP address is registered to a private secure network located at the Hastings Historic Estate in Buckhead, the exact residence of Beatrice Hastings. A collective gasp erupted from the gallery. Nia clamped a hand over her mouth, letting out a muffled, horrified squeak. Beatrice gripped the wooden bench in front of her, her knuckles turning bone white as she stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. She had allowed Marcus to use her home network to forge federal documents. She had actively facilitated the creation of fraudulent evidence. Your Honor, Hughes said, her voice slicing through the rising chaos in the courtroom. Submitting knowingly fabricated documents to a federal judge in an attempt to frame a federal agent is a direct violation of the law. The prosecution formally asserts that this entire family has conspired to commit perjury, wire fraud, and severe obstruction of justice. Judge Caldwell's face turned scarlet with fury. He slammed his gavel down so hard, the sharp crack made Sterling physically jump. Mr. Sterling! Judge Caldwell roared, his voice shaking with absolute outrage. Did you submit fabricated documents traced directly to your client's mother's house to this court? I did not know, Your Honor, Sterling stammered, throwing his hands up and stepping away from Marcus as if his client had suddenly caught fire. My client assured me these were historical documents. I had absolutely no knowledge of their fraudulent origin. Marcus leaped out of his chair, the heavy metal chains rattling wildly around his waist. He lunged toward Sterling, his face contorted in a mask of pure feral rage. You incompetent fool! Marcus screamed, spit flying from his lips as the federal marshals instantly swarmed him. You told me the metadata could be scrubbed. You told me it would work. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. The judge hammered his gavel continuously, shouting for order as the heavily armed marshals wrestled a violently thrashing Marcus back into his chair, pinning his shoulders to the wood. United States Marshals, Judge Caldwell bellowed, pointing his gavel directly at the first row of the gallery. Secure the doors. Do not let those women leave this room. I am issuing an immediate bench warrant for the arrest of Beatrice and Nia Hastings for conspiracy to commit perjury and obstruction of justice. Take them into custody right now. Nia let out a piercing, terrified scream as two marshals stepped smoothly into the aisle, blocking their exit. Beatrice slowly stood up, her legs shaking violently. She looked at the armed officers moving toward her, then looked at her son pinned to the table, then finally turned her horrified gaze toward me. The impenetrable Hastings legacy, the untouchable fortune, the generational arrogance, it had all been reduced to dust. I sat calmly in the witness box, watching the steel handcuffs snap shut around Beatrice's delicate wrists. The trap had closed perfectly, leaving nothing but ruins in its wake. The dust had barely settled from Beatrice and Nia being escorted to the holding cells when the prosecution called their next witness. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and Vanessa walked down the center aisle. She had traded her designer silks for a conservative beige suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun. She was facing 20 years for possessing stolen syndicate assets and acting as an accessory after the fact. She looked completely terrified. Marcus shifted in his seat, practically vibrating with a sudden delusional surge of confidence. He leaned over to his attorney, violently whispering that Vanessa would fix this. He genuinely believed that his former mistress, the woman he had showered with laundered diamonds, would somehow take the stand and fall on her sword for him. He thought the promises of hidden offshore crypto wallets would be enough to buy her permanent loyalty. He had fundamentally forgotten that Vanessa only cared about one thing in this world, and that was her own survival. Vanessa took the oath with trembling hands. Prosecutor Hughes approached the podium, her voice sharp and unrelenting. She asked Vanessa to clarify her knowledge of the Hastings financial operations. Marcus offered Vanessa an encouraging nod, expecting her to launch into the fabricated narrative they had rehearsed before his arrest. Instead, Vanessa burst into heavy theatrical tears. She reached into her blazer pocket and placed a small silver USB drive onto the wooden ledge of the witness box. I did not know what he was doing until it was too late, Vanessa cried, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. But when I realized the danger I was in, I recorded them. I recorded everything to protect myself. Judge Caldwell ordered the bailiff to take the drive and play it on the courtroom monitors. The massive screens flickered to life, revealing the dimly lit interior of the Sovereign Tower penthouse. The footage was shaky, clearly recorded from a phone hidden on a bookshelf. Marcus and Bryce were sitting on the expensive leather sofas drinking imported scotch and laughing uproariously. The audio filled the courtroom, sealing their fates. Marcus was bragging, outlining exactly how he had bypassed the federal auditors by funneling the cartel cash directly through Beatrice's historic preservation charities. But it was the next sentence that truly ignited the room. My mother is so obsessed with her high society image, she never even looks at the ledgers. Marcus laughed on the recording, clinking his glass against Bryce's. She and Naya are the perfect shields. They are so gullible, so desperate to maintain the Hastings legacy, that they will happily walk straight into federal prison while we cash out in Dubai. The courtroom completely exploded. Marcus let out a feral roar of absolute rage. Realizing his mistress had just handed the prosecution the final nail in his coffin, he snapped. He vaulted over the defense table, lunging directly toward the witness stand with his shackled hands raised to strike Vanessa. She screamed and threw herself backward as the heavy wooden partition splintered under his weight. But before Marcus could reach her, Bryce completely lost his mind. Realizing that the video had just explicitly voided his immunity deal by proving he was a primary architect of the fraud, Bryce tackled Marcus from behind. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his orange jumpsuit, spun him around, and drove his fist squarely into Marcus's jaw with a sickening crack. The two men crashed to the floor, tearing at each other like rabid animals, screaming bloody murder as the federal marshals rushed the floor. It was a spectacular circus of greed and betrayal, tearing itself apart right in front of the judge. The physical brawl in the courtroom was the final nail in their collective coffins. Judge Caldwell did not just hold them in contempt. He fast-tracked their sentencing dates, ensuring they had no time to mount any further pathetic appeals. 3 weeks later, we were back in courtroom 4B for the final judgment. The atmosphere was completely different this time. The fight had been entirely beaten out of the Hastings family. They were broken, hollow shells of the arrogant elites they had once pretended to be. Bryce was the first to face the judge. His precious immunity deal was officially shredded the moment Vanessa's video proved he was a primary architect of the offshore fraud. Judge Caldwell showed no mercy. He sentenced Bryce to 15 years in federal prison for large-scale financial racketeering and wire fraud. Every single asset tied to his name was seized. His luxury cars, his international accounts, his stock portfolios, all gone. The fallout from Bryce's ruin crashed directly onto Nia. In a desperate attempt to protect whatever hidden cash he had left, Bryce had filed for a ruthless, expedited divorce from his holding cell. He threw Nia under the bus, claiming she was complicit in laundering his personal funds. The prenuptial agreement she had signed so eagerly years ago left her with absolutely nothing. Nia sat in the gallery today wearing a cheap, unbranded sweater, her face pale and drawn. She was completely destitute. She had been forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the outskirts of the city, and she was not living there alone. Beatrice had lost the historic Buckhead estate. The federal government seized the mansion the moment they proved it was used to facilitate cybercrimes and forge federal documents. Her charity foundations were liquidated. Her country club memberships were permanently revoked. The women she used to host for high tea now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with her. Beatrice, the former queen of Atlanta high society, was now sharing a tiny linoleum-floored kitchen with her bitter, penniless daughter. The thought of those two women trapped in a claustrophobic apartment blaming each other for their ruined lives was a sweeter revenge than any prison sentence. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood before the judge looking incredibly small. The tailored suits and the arrogant sneer were gone forever. Judge Caldwell did not mince his words. He detailed the extensive nature of the syndicate, the identity theft, the forgery, and the utter lack of remorse. Marcus Hastings, the judge, declared, his voice booming through the silent room. For your role in directing a federal money laundering enterprise and for your deliberate attempts to frame a federal agent, I sentence you to 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. Marcus swayed on his feet as the heavy sentence hit him. 20 years. He would be an old, forgotten man by the time he ever saw the outside of a cell. The bailiff stepped forward, grabbing his arms to lead him away. As they turned him toward the holding room doors, Marcus stopped. He looked over his shoulder straight across the aisle until his eyes locked onto mine. There was no anger left in his gaze. There was no hatred. There was only a desperate, pathetic pleading. His eyes silently begged for a mercy he never once showed me. He wanted absolution. He wanted me to look at him with even a fraction of the pity I used to have for him. I held his gaze for one long, silent second. I felt absolutely nothing. I turned my back on him, picked up my briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving him to his cage. The heavy brass doors of the federal courthouse swung shut behind me, cutting off the chaotic noise of the press and the distant shouts of a ruined family. I stepped out into the crisp Atlanta air, taking a deep lungful of absolute vindication. The operation was over, but my work was just beginning. The federal government had seized every single asset tied to the Hastings Syndicate, but through a rapid series of aggressive civil lawsuits regarding identity theft and marital fraud, my legal team secured the rights to liquidate Marcus's personal estate to recoup my damages. 6 months later, I stood in the back of a pristine auction house, watching the remnants of his extravagant life being sold to the highest bidders. His collection of imported sports cars, his custom luxury watches, and the deed to the penthouse where he had brazenly entertained his mistress were all auctioned off piece by piece. The liquidation brought in a massive, unprecedented profit. The money that Marcus and Beatrice had stolen, hoarded, and laundered to build their untouchable legacy was now sitting securely in accounts that I entirely controlled. I did not keep it all for myself. I used the recovered funds to build something that would actually leave a lasting mark. 2 weeks later, I stood on the steps of a sleek glass and steel high-rise in the heart of the financial district. A massive crowd of colleagues, supporters, and media had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I held a pair of oversized golden scissors and sliced through the thick red ribbon, officially opening the doors to Vanguard Risk Auditing. I was no longer a government employee tethered to a bureaucratic desk. I was the founder and CEO of my own independent forensic auditing firm, specializing in corporate fraud and financial reconstruction. But the most satisfying victory came immediately after the ceremony. I stepped up to the podium and announced the creation of the Vanguard Foundation. Using the exact funds that Marcus had washed through his illegal shell companies, I established a permanent full-ride scholarship at Howard University. The fund was dedicated exclusively to supporting brilliant, ambitious African-American women pursuing degrees in forensic accounting and corporate law. Marcus's dirty money was now permanently locked into a system designed to educate and empower the very women he had spent his entire life underestimating and exploiting. It was the ultimate poetic justice. The camera pans in a slow, deliberate circular motion. I am sitting behind a massive polished mahogany desk in my new corner office. The city skyline stretches out behind me, bathed in the golden light of sunset. I lean back into the plush leather chair, resting my hands confidently on the armrests. I look directly into the camera lens, my expression calm, unyielding, and completely victorious. When a woman walks away with empty hands, do not rush to laugh at her, because the only thing she leaves behind is the verdict for your stupidity. Never confuse silence with weakness. It is just the time we use to load our weapons. If you have ever been underestimated by others, stand up and show them who makes the rules of the game. Leave your story in the comments below, hit like and subscribe to see the next plot twists.